Narkvosu just wanted to survive, at least long enough to complete his quest. He cared little about the tunnel war raging beneath his sublevel. He could care less about ever returning to his home city. Alone, he explored the last obstacle to his journey, an ancient cavern carved out long ago. Concrete and steel are now dust. Bedrock exposed. Nothing remained, the running creek, the moisture and gangumas making short work of what was once probably a vast urban habitation. If one could not define any of the telltale signatures of a past civilization, the sublevel appeared just like a long natural cave. 100,000 years. That's the theory when humanity migrated underground. 100,000 theories as to why they did. 100,000 theories as to what the surface is like. Narkvosu just needed to prove just one. That a way out to the surface existed. That the mythical surface was real. That the Apollogon fables were true. Many like him had attempted this, most now embedded in legend. The supergovernment persecuted all that tried or peddled in the outer surface sciences. This military conflict between the Echelon Renegata and the geotheocracy offered Narkvosu a chance to get closer to the upper sublevels. Strategically, the tunnel networks above the city levels proved to be vulnerabilities for the ruling class for generations. Conquest, piracy, and restrictions made these tunnels impossible to traverse. Beyond them dwell the plethora of outcast machine men and modified humans. For 2 years he traveled upward. 2 years of fighting, surviving, and hiding. 2 years of working in mines, of digging, of exploring. 2 years. He survived so far, and he would be damned if he came so close to breaching the surface only to die in the cold, dark wilderness. Of the myriad of theories, he held on to one, its importance to his expedition crucial. This sun, if indeed it existed, should be warming the lithosphere by now. Science knew and proved that the radiation pumping up from the Earth's core provided warmth for all life to exist. But the higher he journeyed, the colder it felt. He knew some regions had sublevels ending in rock and ice. The echelons were a place where no ice had ever been known to exist. Water ran down. Wildlife thrived. No ice. Narkvosu gambled everything. This was the place. The sublevels went up and up. Cavities, pockets, and shafts, all interconnected with tunnels, all man-made. Somewhere up there he knew was the surface. Narkvosu also knew the trek upward would get harder, relishing his perseverance in carrying his climbing equipment for 2 years. He lost colleagues, friends, his sanity, his innocence, but the climbing gear, invented and handmade by that miner he befriended, would survive. He rested among the mushmush for a day, letting their acrid stench protect him from predators. Narkvosu began his ascent well-rested and in earnest. He could sleep a year, but he felt he was close. The sublevel was unusually spacious. He figured it might have once been a public space rather than a residential one. The bedrock appeared smooth and straight, lacking the twisting contours evident in other, much lower places. There was no heavy air pressure up here, he thought, remembering the lectures of famous geotheologist Terevan Academus. Once at the top, he peered into a square cave, untouched by the elements. Inside, a shaft soared upward which after a brief climb brought him up to another sublevel. As he peered out into the darkness, he lost some of his enthusiasm. He needed to decide whether to push on with the supplies he had left, or go back and try again with the terrain knowledge he now knew. A risk either way. The tunnel battle below destroyed many of the communities he had sheltered in, and now that he was officially a deserter, an instant death penalty awaited him. To press on, there was no going back. He would die, or his hope that the one theory in thousands would prove true. That another world existed on the surface. A living world under a living sun. If proved right, he would find sustenance, recover, and head back down. Narkvosu did not consider this fantasy thinking. He had survived so far. He had gone from eating people meat supplied readily and free by the city food collective to killing for his own people meat. The war made this easy, but killing and eating were major hurdles for him. Now he ate non-people meat, grubberts, gliths, even insects. He felt confident he could eat the exobiology if they did exist. And the sun? He bet he could survive that too. The old geotheologist warned of a painful death from its exposure. Burning light, he called it. Nartvosu felt unconvinced. The cooler sublevels above him defied that logic. The heat would emanate from above, not below. One theory he could agree held true was that the air thinned the higher the elevation. He could barely breathe now and was forced to slow down. He decided to press ahead. For the first time, he noticed that this sublevel was free of any moisture. The concrete walls were still intact. The further he traversed, he encountered less and less wildlife. This meant that it got darker and darker as the luminescent gangumas struggled to survive in this dry and cold environment. Nartvosu, now excited, found a tunnel entrance and ventured inside. For the first time in a long while, he trod on steps. He encountered more steps and climbed further and further up. The air grew tighter in his chest, but he persevered. Nartvosu found a room. Inside he came across nothing but square walls and stains where artifacts once stood but had corroded away. He discovered a narrow shaft and continued up until he came to another room. Same story, corrosion stains, thin, hardly breathable air. But this one had something that looked like a hatch. A glass panel. Nartvosu gazed into the little window but could see nothing but a black void. He heard a hiss, and that is when he noticed the crack forming near the edge of the glass. He watched and heard air hissing through the tiny aperture. The pressure is vastly lower out there, he thought as the thrill of his discovery tingled along his spine. He found more rooms, similar in layout, each with solid steel hatch doors twice his size. He now truly believed the science behind his ancestors, that they were once twice his size. Nartvosu studied what he could see outside the small round glass panels embedded in the center of each hatch door. He noticed tiny lights above. Thousands of them, like gangumas growing on the ceiling, but instead of green-blue. These tiny lights glowed brilliant white. Was this the sun? He thought, reimagining every fable he had ever read. He touched the glass. Cold, freezing, unbearable. He looked at what he was convinced was the surface, but all he saw was a smooth, featureless dark plain. His heart skipped a beat when he spotted the horizon in the distance, a line where the tiny lights ended and the dim surface began. If he strained his eyes, he could almost see it glow. Nartvosu had done it. He had reached the surface. But the thrill of it all faded quickly. With his fantasy now destroyed, he huddled in a corner and rested. His thoughts turned to surviving the journey back. He had accomplished what no other man had ever done, but even that triumph felt stale. How many others have reached this spot and discovered the awful truth? How many died returning, or if they did return, held back the truth? Did the supergovernment know this? Did the Apollogon geotheocracy also know and suppress it to expatiate their mythology? Nartvosu remembered the myth about the moving sun. It was why life and language had their day and night, and why gangumas and croakers cycled in brightness to accommodate civilization's sleep patterns. The sun moved, day and night. So he slept, conserving his energy, counting the minutes. A mining slave once told him, an anecdote he had picked up along the way, that a cult of scientists believed that the earth was a ball and that the sun rotated around the earth. They had built a gravity machine to detect and prove it. This information was one of the reasons Nartvosu persisted in his quest to the surface. He waited more than a whole day, drifting in and out of consciousness. Even in the dim light, he could see his skin losing its blue coloring. Nartvosu looked outside one last time. He looked up at the little lights, millions of them. His eyes noticed a dark patch, almost perfectly round. Whatever was hiding in the shadows, Narkvosu knew he would never find out. Time and the thin air had turned against him. With a disillusioned soul, he began his journey back down to the city levels, first crawling, then, as the air returned to his lungs, to normal walking. Narkvosu just wanted to survive long enough to get home, even though he knew he would pay a heavy price for his desertion. And a heavier price if he ever told anyone the results of his quest beyond the sublevels.